Tonight, nuclear showdown. North Korea tests a new bomb and draws instant condemnation from Beijing to the White House.
The United States and the international community must take action in response.
I'm Jeff Glor. Also tonight, a nationwide manhunt is over. A 13-year-old cancer patient and his mother are back in Minnesota after fleeing to avoid court-ordered chemotherapy. Plus, disturbing and humiliating side effects linked to a prescription drug used by hundreds of thousands of children.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
And good evening. Katie's off tonight. We begin with North Korea and the uproar caused by their latest nuclear weapons test. Today's underground explosion was their largest yet, setting off seismographs and world leaders. And if North Korea was looking for attention, they got it. We have two reports tonight, beginning with Barry Peterson.
Their nerves rattled. South Koreans quickly took to the streets in anger. The nuclear device triggered just before 10 a.m. local time at a facility about 235 miles northeast of Pyongyang, registering as a 4.7 magnitude seismic event. It's the same area the North used for its first nuclear test 3 years ago. The Russians estimated today's explosion as comparable to the bombs dropped in Hiroshima or Nagasaki during World War II. But South Korean experts say the blast was a fraction of that. Next today, the North staged a series of short-range missile launches. And finally came the propaganda. North Korean TV telling its people the tests were, quote, measures to bolster nuclear deterrent for self-defense. South Korea called it a provocative action which will never be tolerated. Officials here in China may well see this as a setback in their efforts to negotiate an end to the North's nuclear weapons program. Those negotiations are currently stalled. And the North's attitude, if today's tests are any indication, seems to be forget any new talks anytime soon. On April 5th, the North test-fired a long-range ballistic missile. It crossed over Japan and fell harmlessly into the ocean. But to some, it is proof that the North has no intention of giving up its program because its goal is facing down the U.S.
When North Koreans successfully own ICBMs, they will no longer have to be subservient to the United States at the negotiating table.
The North now says it will restart its one nuclear reactor, which it had once promised to dismantle, and even blew up its cooling tower as an act of goodwill. But goodwill is in short supply after today's test, with the North clearly back developing what the world most fears, nuclear weapons and the missiles to carry them. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Beijing.
This is Bill Plant at the White House. President Obama condemned the North Korean tests, calling the actions a grave threat to peace and security.
They are a blatant violation of international law, and they contradict North Korea's own prior commitments. Now, the United States and the international community must take action in response.
The North Korean tests are widely regarded as an attempt to engage the U.S. in direct talks. But the president said today's actions only deepen North Korea's isolation.
North Korea will not find security and respect through threats and illegal weapons. We will work with our friends and allies to stand up to this behavior.
President Obama's tough denunciation was matched by America's key partners in the talks, who've attempted to negotiate an end to North Korea's nuclear program. China, according to a statement on government TV, expresses absolute opposition toward this. Russian TV reported on its government's condemnation of the tests, saying they were a matter of the most serious concern. The Japanese said they would not tolerate such activity. Britain's Prime Minister Brown called them a danger to the world. In an emergency meeting this afternoon, the UN Security Council quickly condemned the test as a violation of two previous resolutions and began work on new sanctions.
We are now resolved to work on a resolution. We believe it ought to be a strong resolution with appropriately strong content.
New sanctions could include measures like inspecting all cargo to and from North Korea, but that's very tricky because it would probably involve armed force, and then China would be likely to veto it. Jeff?
All right, Bill Plant at the White House tonight. Bill, thank you. Juan Zarate is a national security analyst for CBS News. Juan, always good to see you. Let's start with a simple question. We've seen North Korea provoke before. Why are they doing it this time?
Hi, Jeff. I think North Korea is trying to increase its leverage internationally by increasing the level of belligerence. They've learned from the recent past that by upping the ante, they can gain diplomatic recognition as well as material concessions like oil and food shipments, as well as lighten sanctions. In this instance, they're clearly sending a message or trying to send a message of strength to the South Korean government, which has been less willing to deal with the North, as well as to the new Obama administration in advance of any talks. Also, this could be part of an attempt by Kim Jong-il, who suffered a stroke last year, to strengthen his hand in any internal battles with respect to succession.
Okay, so North Korea is doing it. Realistically, what can the U.S. do about it?
Well, I think there are some things that can be done. Enforcement of existing sanctions is important, as well as strengthening sanctions. Inspection of North Korean cargo and shipments. Freezing of assets of the leadership as well as the regime. Application of the private-based sanctions that worked in 2005, focused on North Korean illicit financial activity. That works. The key here will be China, though, which has served as the diplomatic and financial lifeline for North Korea. And the Obama administration will clearly be working with China to try to get China to exert its influence and rein in the North Koreans.
All right, Juan Zarate, great information tonight. Thank you from Washington.
Thank you.
A nationwide manhunt ended today when a 13-year-old cancer patient and his mother returned home to Minnesota. They ran away last week to avoid court-ordered treatment, searching instead for a natural cure. Dean Reynolds has late details on this tonight. Dean, good evening to you.
Good evening, Jeff. Well, that national manhunt ended at 3 o'clock this morning when a charter flight from California landed in Minnesota carrying Mrs. Hauser and her son Daniel. Now, all arrest warrants for Mrs. Hauser have been dropped, and Daniel has already had a medical checkup.
It is a good day as Daniel and Colleen Hauser have been safely returned to Minnesota.
Their return was facilitated by a lawyer in Southern California and a media company that paid for the flight. Asked why they came back, the sheriff could only speculate.
You know, I think they wanted to come back home. They wanted to get together with their family.
Their disappearance had horrified doctors and frustrated authorities for almost a week. The FBI said Colleen Hauser and Daniel left the family's Minnesota home for Los Angeles last Tuesday, apparently in search of alternative treatments for his cancer in Mexico. The boy had received an initial round of chemotherapy and radiation before it was stopped in February in favor of natural remedies more in keeping with the family's religious objections to modern medicine. But that decision ran against the advice of his doctor, his lawyer, and others.
I don't know how long he will live, but without standard therapy, he will not be cured of this.
In fact, a week ago, a court-ordered X-ray found Daniel's tumor was expanding. The local court, believing his parents were medically negligent, scheduled a hearing on how to proceed. But Mrs. Hauser and her son never showed up.
Now, there's no word on whether or even if chemotherapy treatments will be resumed, but doctors say there's a 95% chance of recovery in Daniel's case with his Hodgkin's lymphoma, should he choose to resume the treatment. Jeff?
Dean Reynolds in Chicago. Dean, tonight, thank you. President Obama today led the nation's observance of Memorial Day. This morning, he laid a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknowns in Arlington National Cemetery and praised the courage of U.S. servicemen and women.
They felt some tug. They answered a call. They said, "I'll go." That is why they are the best of America. That is what separates them from those who've not served in uniform.
For U.S. troops serving overseas, the day was intensely personal. U.S. troops gathered at a military camp in Baghdad to honor the 4,300 Americans killed in the Iraq War, including 79 this year. And in Kabul, they paid tribute to 687 Americans killed in Afghanistan, 57 in 2009. 21,000 additional U.S. troops are due in Afghanistan this year.
U.S. Army rocks the house.
For some troops, there was a happy homecoming today. Nearly 400 members of the National Guard's 50th Infantry Brigade Combat Team, just back from Iraq, saw their families at Fort Dix in New Jersey. The brigade had been stationed in Iraq since last June, for some their third tour of duty. Nice to see. Still ahead here on the CBS Evening News. A powerful mind drug that can harm children's bodies. A powerful medication called Risperdal has become a drug of choice for doctors treating patients with psychological problems. Last year, it was prescribed more than 6.5 million times and totaled more than $1.5 billion in sales. But Risperdal can have troubling side effects, especially in children. Cheryl Atkinson has details in this CBS News investigation.
John is 19 years old. That's him with his niece. We've chosen not to show his face.
That's my baby.
When John was just 7, he began taking Risperdal for ADD. Even though the FDA approved the drug only for adult patients who are psychotic, John's doctor and others widely prescribed it to kids for less severe behavior problems. Once taking Risperdal, John's mom says he became aggressive, sleepy, and developed bowel problems. But the biggest shock came when he was 14 and started developing women's breasts.
For a 14-year-old boy, that has to be horribly embarrassing.
He asked me, was he a girl?
He asked if he was a girl.
He tried to put on his sister's bra.
These photos show John's out-of-control breast growth. It turns out Risperdal can increase production of a hormone called prolactin, which stimulates breast growth. It's called gynecomastia, and it's irreversible. Risperdal and other so-called atypical antipsychotics have exploded in use. Hundreds of thousands of kids have been prescribed Risperdal in the 14 years it's been on sale, most of them long before the FDA approved it for very limited pediatric use. John and most of the other children weren't psychotic at all, but were given Risperdal for behavior disorders, including autism and ADD.
It's about as bad a thing as a boy can get that I can imagine.
Attorney Stephen Scheller is suing Janssen, which makes Risperdal. He claims Janssen marketed Risperdal for unapproved uses in children, downplayed serious risks like diabetes and seizures, and breast growth wasn't even mentioned under warnings, but was buried under precautions in obscure terms. Janssen wouldn't agree to an interview, but told us the breast growth risk is clearly stated in the FDA-approved labeling, and we only promote our products for their FDA-approved indications. Nobody knows how often it happens, but in Janssen's own clinical trials with fewer than 2,000 children, 43 developed the abnormal breasts. Scheller represents John and 9 other boys, including this one who was only 4 when he developed a breast on one side and began producing milk.
This child has had mastectomies.
The treatment for the unbridled breast growth is as unthinkable as the disorder, painful removal of the breasts. Eventually, the boys can appear normal again. Here's the 4-year-old after surgery, and John after a double mastectomy. The family's lawsuit is still in court.
Did the surgery fix all of his problems from the medicine?
No.
He still thinks he's a
Yes.
As for Risperdal, it's still on the market, and families say putting even more children at risk. Cheryl Atkinson, CBS News, Philadelphia.
Thousands of hurricane survivors in Louisiana and Mississippi face a Saturday eviction deadline to give up their FEMA trailers. They've been living in them since Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita hit nearly 4 years ago, in spite of FEMA's repeated attempts to get them to leave. Some trailers have high levels of chemicals that are known to cause health problems, and authorities point out the trailers are considered unsafe in a severe storm. When we come back here, they hit speeds approaching 200 miles an hour, but not in America. Will that change? On the CBS Money Watch tonight, 27 million people hit the highways for the holiday weekend, slightly more than last year. And the reason may have been the shrinking cost of fuel. Gas prices currently average $2.42 nationwide, down more than $1.50 from a year ago. It's long been believed the highways and airways would be even less crowded if there was a faster, more efficient passenger train system in this country, like those high-speed bullet trains in Europe and Asia. Will it happen? Here's Jeff Greenfield.
In Japan, the bullet train has been racing across the country for 45 years at 185 miles per hour. In China, trains run between Beijing and Tianjin at more than 200 miles an hour. In Europe, trains crisscross Britain, France, and Spain faster than 150 miles per hour. But here in the United States, only the Acela briefly reaches speeds of more than 100 miles an hour on its Boston to Washington run. For most of that trip, it averages more like 85.
Why? Why does the United States lag years, decades behind Europe and Asia? Can a new administration really put this country on track for high-speed rail? And should it?
In the years after World War II, the rise of suburbia and the dawn of jet travel made the auto and the airplane dominant. But now, congested roads and skies have helped gain support for high-speed rail. From longtime Amtrak commuter Vice President Biden,
it's about time we took those railways and made them the national treasures they should be.
And from the president as well.
Imagine whisking through towns at speeds over 100 miles an hour, walking only a few steps to public transportation.
Obama's stimulus plan includes an initial $13 billion for high-speed rail projects along the Northeast Corridor in the Midwest, California, and Florida. A train going at the speed of the European model would make it from New York to Washington in about an hour and a half. It's about the same from Atlanta to Charlotte, North Carolina. San Francisco to Los Angeles, about 2.5 hours. And, says Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood, it will benefit even those who don't use it.
If people get on trains, they're not going to be on airplanes, and they're not going to be in their automobiles, and I think it'll relieve congestion on highways and at airports.
But the roadblocks are daunting. High-speed rail would require a detailed examination of some 8,500 miles of track. Nobody knows how much of that would have to be smoothed out, or where overpasses and underpasses would have to replace grade crossings. And then there's the cost estimate, running into the hundreds of billions of dollars.
You're trying to sell a system that is ultra expensive as though it were something that were designed for the masses to be affordable, and it's not.
Moreover, with the prospect of trillion-dollar deficits stretching years into the future, high-speed trains will likely not be leaving the station anytime soon. Jeff Greenfield, CBS News, Washington.
You might say the Times have caught up with Times Square. Always a draw for tourists and New Yorkers alike, the Great White Way has now changed, at least for the next 6 months, hoping to cut down on city traffic and make both Times and Herald Squares greener and safer. Both are now off limits to cars and trucks. If today is any indication, the experiment's a hit. But then Broadway's used to that, right? That is the CBS Evening News tonight. I'm Jeff Glor. Katie's back tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Good night.